Hello and welcome. This is Roger Royce on TAL Radio with Silicon Valley Impact, where every week we bring you stories of the movers and shakers in Silicon Valley that are doing something good for the world. And today, we're really excited to be able to talk to my former partner, John Montgomery, who has launched the Center for Global Consciousness, as well as several other initiatives. He's going to talk to us today about the concept of conscious capitalism and some of the ideas around that and where the world is going in that direction. So first of all, thanks for being here, John. It's great that you can do this.
Oh, you're welcome, Roger. It's really fun to make happy mischief with you again.
So before we jump into what you're doing now, you're kind of even today. I know you haven't been here in the Valley for a while. You've moved up north a little bit. I mean, you're certainly an industry luminary. Everybody in the world knows you. You've been around a long time. You've done a lot of venture capital and startup stuff. Tell us a little bit about your stuff and your background and how you kind of got to where you are right now.
Well, as you remember, when we were at General Counsel Associates together in the 90s, I had the good fortune of working for Gordon Campbell and his tech farm incubator. And Gordy had a really hot hand for probably the last 3 or 4 years in the 90s. I think he was probably the one of the hottest VCs in the Valley, and pretty much everything he touched turned to gold. And I saw a developmental pattern in Gordy's companies, and that seemed to be a precursor or an indicator of success. And my thought was, if I could reverse engineer what was going on in those companies, we could optimize the probability that companies would be successful. And that thought sort of led me down a long journey where, to make a very long story short, where I ended up was realizing that, here we are in Silicon Valley. We're the global center of innovation, and we're launching businesses in corporate structures that were designed in the Middle Ages. And we're not designing corporations that are optimized for human beings and how they work best. And optimizing a business for neuroscience and so on and so forth, and to optimize peak human performance doesn't guarantee that the business is going to be successful, because you still have to succeed in the marketplace. But you can certainly optimize your probability of success. And this got me into benefit corporations, B Corps, all the rest of it, because I concluded that the corporate form itself was ripe for innovation, because the corporate form that dominates the world basically unwittingly is prone to sociopathic behavior, because it optimizes profit at the expense of society and the environment. And my thought was to endow the corporation with a conscience, so that we could reverse that inadvertent lobotomy and cause corporations to maximize profit and optimize their social and environmental impacts as well. So that's a very short version of how I got to where I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is all the rage now, of course, especially here in the Valley. Like every VC now is talking about ESG, and it's mostly the E, but there's also all the other stuff. So it's a very hot topic, even in startup land, even for small companies now. So everybody really needs to pay attention to this. You said something really interesting. You used I think a term of art, a benefit corp or a B Corp. But what is that about?
Well, a benefit corporation is a for-profit corporation that's identical to the standard C corporation that we all know and love, except it is required to provide a material positive impact on society and the environment from its operations taken as a whole. So it begins to endow the corporation with a conscience, and it begins to recognize a multiple stakeholder model. And the current model of the corporation basically is shareholder primacy. There's basically one set of stakeholders that matters, and that's the shareholder. And a benefit corporation starts to recognize that a corporation is actually a composite of multiple stakeholders, and the economic data suggests that companies that do a good job maintaining good relationships with all of their stakeholders do better economically. They're more profitable. So for a profit-oriented world like Silicon Valley, the benefit corporation or the B Corp makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that would make sense that people would want to do business with companies like that, and that should lead to profitability. Well, that is really interesting. We're going to talk more about that. But first, we're going to take a short break. This is Roger Royce on Silicon Valley Impact. I'm speaking with John Montgomery. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Silicon Valley Impact. I'm Roger Royce. I'm speaking with John Montgomery. We're talking with the Center for Global Consciousness. We've been talking about capitalism, B Corps, how corporations are structured, what the corporation of the future might be like, especially with regard to having a conscience. Let's shift gears a little bit here, John. I know you're working on a new project and a new book around net zero emissions. Can you tell us what that's about?
Sure. Well, Larry Fink of BlackRock, in his annual letter to CEOs, basically told CEOs that they need to be able to show BlackRock their transition plan to conform their business models to a net zero emissions economy. We're trying to get the carbon out of the global economic system. Right now, the collective of humanity is engaged in a giant science experiment because we're putting, plus or minus, 60 billion metric tons of CO2 and CO2 equivalents into the atmosphere, and those are greenhouse gases that trap heat from the sun. And scientists have modeled what that's going to mean for us if we don't do something. And there's been quite a lot of talk about getting the carbon out of the economy, but not enough action yet. And so when the money, BlackRock, I think, is the world's largest asset manager, starts telling public companies, hey, you got to show us a plan to get the carbon out of your business model, people start paying attention. The one challenge with Larry Fink's pronouncement is that there's not a blueprint for how to go about doing that, or how to think about getting the carbon out of your business model. A lot of companies have set carbon reduction targets. So they've basically said, okay, by 2030, we'll get 50% of the carbon out of our emissions based on our 2017 numbers. And in their mind, they think that's a transition plan. That's, sort of like in a business, the difference between a budget and a strategic plan. A lot of people think a budget is a strategic plan, but it's like, how are you going to get those numbers? How are you going to deliver those carbon targets? So the book is an attempt to provide a resource for companies globally to help them come up with their transition plan, how to think about getting carbon out of their business model, how to think about reinventing their business, how to think about getting the carbon out of product lines, and so on and so forth. And while we're on the topic of Silicon Valley and I was thrilled to hear that companies are now very interested in ESG and all this kind of stuff. There's no reason why every company being started in Silicon Valley shouldn't start out with a net zero emission business model, because it's a hell of a lot easier to get the carbon out of your business model before you start than afterwards. It's very, very expensive. And there's a hidden carbon short in the economy, in the sense that everybody expects that carbon taxes are coming. We don't know when. Canada already has one in place that's going to go up to, I think, $170 a ton by 2030. And most likely what will be the precipitating event is some horrible ecological disaster, a heat wave in Europe that is worse than the one in 2003 that killed 70,000 people, a heat wave in India, something like that will wake us up that, like, okay, this is really real. And since this program has a Silicon Valley orientation, I would strongly recommend any founder starting a company today to incorporate a net zero business model into their business plan from the get-go, because it'll be a lot less expensive to design your business without minimizing its carbon footprint than retrofitting it later.
Yeah, and plus make the company a lot more attractive, both to its customers as well as to investors. I mean, I'm not kidding. The due diligence lists, they all have this stuff on it now from every major investor. So I think your efforts are paying off. People are realizing it. But what you said is really interesting. The how-to is the hard part. So, and that's what your book will cover.
Yeah, and we're trying to give people pathways to net zero, how to think about it, how to get your head around it. And it's for an existing company that has a lot of carbon in it, in its business model, like a steel manufacturing company that uses a ton of emits a ton of CO2 in the smelting process. How do you go about getting that carbon out of the business model? What's your pathway to net zero? How do you think about it? And it becomes, I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, this is something we can delegate to the sustainability guy or gal, or the or the ESG person, but it really becomes a company-wide problem, because if you're tracking your emissions, you're generating massive amounts of data, and 88% of companies are still tracking their carbon data using Excel spreadsheets. So Excel is probably one of the biggest impediments to achieving a net zero emissions economy. And we got to have companies have to have a data analytics strategy to keep track of their data.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. We'll look forward to seeing the book when it comes out and hearing more about the net zero emissions project. This is Roger Royce with Silicon Valley Impact. I'm talking with John Montgomery from the Center for Global Consciousness. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Roger Royce, Silicon Valley Impact on TAL Radio. I'm talking with John Montgomery from the Center for Global Consciousness, also working on a new net zero emission project. John, I want to circle back and talk a little bit more about B Corps and Benefit Corps, because it sounds like you might really be on to something here that, we hear a lot about that here in California, but this sounds like something that I'm curious. Is it spreading around the world? Is it growing? Is this a movement that's getting bigger and bigger and will someday be the dominant paradigm? What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me just get some terminology out of the way. A benefit corporation, as we previously discussed, is a corporation that is a creature of statute, right? It's a particular type of corporation that's authorized by law. A B Corp is a business, and it can be any kind of a business, a sole proprietorship, a partnership, a corporation, an LLC, that has passed a not-for-profit B Labs sort of ESG assessment. And they're affectionately known as B Corps, and often benefit corps and B Corps are both affectionately referred to as B Corps. And when I fell into I met one of the founders of B Lab, Andrew Kasoy, at a Conscious Capitalism conference in Austin in 2008. And I thought, oh my God, this is the future of capitalism. And I was convinced that because the multiple stakeholder model that both B Corps and benefit corporations espouse has been demonstrated to be more profitable than a single stakeholder model, I thought Silicon Valley would be all over this stuff. And this would be the next disruptive technology, like the browser, like the cell phone, and it would go global in a matter of 5 or 6 years. And I've been personally surprised at how slow the uptake has been. And you know, B Corps have gone global. There are dozens of publicly traded B Corps. There are dozens of publicly traded benefit corporations. But the total number of B Corps globally is, I think, just short of 5,000. The number of, I've lost track of how many benefit corporations and benefit LLCs there are in the United States. At last count, I think it was somewhere around 15,000. The benefit corporation statute has been adopted by several Latin American companies in Italy. So it is going global, but one of the reasons why I am doing the net zero emission project is I extrapolated the adoption rate of the benefit corp and the B Corp, and I realized it wouldn't, at the current rate of adoption, it wouldn't become the main way of doing things until I was probably buried in the ground. And you know, my belief is that we've got to transform the global economic system if humanity is going to have a prayer. And at a minimum, we got to get the carbon out of it. And so you know, it's been a little bit I don't know, sobering at how long it's taken to you know, for the mainstream to adopt it. But that's you know, that's often true with innovations. There are pioneers and early adopters, and it takes a while to get enough critical mass for things to go mainstream. And it feels like there's a lot of awareness about it now, you know, 15 years later. It just, I'm an impatient guy, and it just wasn't moving fast enough for me.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember when it started out, it was actually very confusing. I know there was something called a flexible purpose corporation, you know, that was competing for a while. So as a practitioner, it was a little bit hard to navigate, honestly. So hopefully that gets straightened out.
And lawyers actually are one of the biggest impediments to the benefit corporation, because lawyers, you know, we're trained by our education to be upholders of the status quo. We tend not to be innovators. And we also tend to be lazy. It's like, I don't want to learn a new law. I've mastered the law that I've got. And so there was a lot of resistance to the benefit corporation. And I still have former partners that are telling potential clients that want to be benefit corporations, oh, you don't want to do that, you know. And it's like, there's no impediment to getting financed if you're a benefit corporation, you know. So it's just been I've been surprised at how, I mean, this really should be how everybody's doing business. When I explain the benefit corporation and the B Corp to and my next door neighbor who's a contractor, the response is often, well, shouldn't every corporation do business this way? And the answer is yes. But I believe we will get there at some point. This will become the norm,
Yeah.
but it's taking a lot longer than I thought.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for that explanation. We certainly hope that it does, and thanks for helping that along. By the way, is that mostly what you do at the Center for Global Consciousness? I know that you do strategic advice and transformational assistance. Is this one of the main areas?
Well, I got into executive coaching primarily because I saw a correlation between how a leader was showing up and the probability of success. And to grossly simplify things, we humans tend to be fear-based or love and trust-based. And most of us are in survival mode. So we tend to be, in operating out of fear most of the time. And fear is a lousy operating system, and it's an even lousier leadership system. And a lot of what I try to do in my executive coaching practice is help leaders understand the hidden dynamics of leadership so that they can emanate an infectiously positive workplace that is supportive of peak human performance. Because when human beings work in environments where they're loved and trusted, they're twice as productive, they're twice as happy, and you get half the employee turnover. And Roger, you and I have run businesses, and we know you and I both know what a pain in the butt it is to have high employee turnover. You got to train somebody new, it's disruptive, your clients get upset, you lose clients. You want happy, motivated employees. And so that's a lot of what I do in the Center for Global Consciousness is try to bring awareness of some of these hidden dynamics of leadership to top leaders so that they can create these high performing work environments. And this is getting back to our first conversation. This is really how every company that's being built in Silicon Valley today should be designed. We finally understand enough about the human being, the human psyche, human psychology, human consciousness, that we can design corporations that are optimized for peak human performance. And we're not doing that.
Great. Well, last question, John. How does someone get a hold of you if they want to hear more about any of the number of things we've talked about here today?
Probably the best way is by email, jmontgomery@lexultima.com.
Lex Ultima. Okay. All right. Well, great. And I'm sure they can find you on the web as well, right?
Yeah. Or global. If they want more information, look at my LinkedIn profile or the Center for Global Consciousness.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for being here, John. This is Roger Royce with Silicon Valley Impact. We've been talking today with John Montgomery from the Center for Global Consciousness on a wide variety of topics: net zero emissions, conscious capitalism, the Center for Global Consciousness. Again, thanks, John, for participating. Thank you, audience. We'll see you all next week.